A promising life. A campus leader. A young woman everyone believed was destined to change the world. And then she vanished from her own home in the dead of night. No forced entry. No frantic goodbye. Just silence. Hours later, police discovered a body lying on a quiet street, shot multiple times. No identification, no phone, no wallet. Just a lifeless young woman whose bright future had been ripped away. And when the truth finally came out, it stunned the entire nation. This is the story of Eve Carson, and the brutal murder that left a university, a community, and an entire country in disbelief. Eve Carson wasn't just another college student. Born on November 19th, 1985, in Athens, Georgia, she grew up as that rare person who seemed to do it all. By high school, she was already a force of nature. Vice president of the student council, volunteering at nursing homes and shelters for abused teens, spending summers as a congressional page, even assisting in a stem cell research lab. And she did it all while pulling straight A grades. She wasn't just smart. She was driven, compassionate, the kind of person people remembered after meeting just once. After graduating with honors, Eve headed to the University of North Carolina, where her reputation only grew. She double majored in political science and biology, snagged one of the most prestigious scholarships in the country, and quickly became a leader on campus. President of this, member of that, teaching science to elementary kids, traveling abroad to volunteer in Ecuador, study in Cuba, and research in Egypt. She was everywhere. She was unstoppable, and she had big dreams. A career already lined up before graduation, a future that promised to be nothing short of extraordinary. But on the night of March 5th, 2008, everything went dark. That night, Eve's friends were heading to a party. Around 1:30 a.m., they called out to her, "Come with us!" But Eve shook her head. She wanted to stay in, study for class. It wasn't unusual. She was disciplined like that. So her roommates left, and Eve stayed behind in the quiet house. When they returned just 3 hours later, the scene didn't feel right. The front door was wide open. The lights were still burning. And Eve was gone. So was her car. At first they thought maybe she had gone out unexpectedly. Maybe she'd gotten a late-night call. But as the hours ticked by, worry set in. By morning, they knew something was wrong. That's when they called police. But before officers could even begin the missing persons case, a horrifying connection was made. Earlier that morning, around 5 a.m., a woman living just a mile from Eve's house had woken up to the sound of gunfire, followed by a single, piercing scream. She dialed 911, unsure of what had happened. When police arrived, they found a young woman's body lying face down in the street. No ID, no purse, no phone, just blood, shell casings, and silence. When detectives showed Eve's friends a photograph of the body, the reaction was immediate. The victim was Eve Carson. The shock rippled across the city. The smiling, beloved student body president was gone, executed in the middle of the night. But the question was why? Detectives quickly pieced together a timeline. At 1:30 a.m., Eve was home studying. At 3:30 a.m., her laptop showed activity, meaning she was still alive, still working. But by 5 a.m., she was dead in the street. Somewhere in that 90-minute window, something had gone terribly wrong. Her car was missing. Her wallet, too. Investigators began to suspect robbery. And yet, nothing about it made sense. Then came the first big clue. Just 18 minutes after her last activity on the computer, Eve's bank account showed a withdrawal. $700 taken out, split across 2 transactions. The ATM, on the far side of town. Detectives rushed to check surveillance cameras. And there, sitting in Eve's car, bold as day, was a young man, pulling money out of her account. In the back seat, another figure. The footage was grainy, but investigators couldn't shake the feeling. Was that Eve? Was she still alive, trapped in her own car, watching her captors drain her money? The image haunted them, and the withdrawals didn't stop there. Over the next 2 days, Eve's card was used again and again at ATMs across the city. Some had cameras. Most didn't, but one thing became clear. Whoever had taken her wasn't just a thief. They were ruthless. On March 7th, just 2 days after the murder, another attempt was made at a convenience store ATM. This time, the cameras captured a different man using Eve's card. Now investigators had 2 suspects. Were they working together, passing her stolen card around? Detectives released the images to the public, begging for leads. Calls flooded in. Some tips were wild goose chases, but one stood out. On March 12th, An anonymous caller picked up the phone and said the name. Investigators had been waiting for Demario Atwater, just 21 years old, already a career criminal. Assault, robbery, drugs, weapons, you name it. He'd been arrested for it. And when detectives pulled his mugshot, when police put the name Demario Atwater to the grainy surveillance footage, it felt like the break they'd been waiting for. Finally a face. Finally a suspect. But as detectives soon realized, Eve Carson's murder wasn't just the act of one man. There was someone else. Someone younger. Someone just as cold. Detectives traced Atwater's movements in the days after the killing. His name kept popping up in connection with another figure, Lawrence Lovett. Just 17 years old, already well known to police. Breaking and entering, armed robbery, a rap sheet that looked more like that of a career criminal than a teenager. And when detectives pulled his mugshot, their blood ran cold. Lawrence was a near-perfect match for the man seen in the first ATM video, the one driving Eve's car. But bringing him in wasn't going to be easy. When police arrived at Lawrence's home, he didn't come quietly. He barricaded himself inside, forcing a tense standoff with SWAT. Officers surrounded the house, lights cutting through the night. Hours ticked by. Finally, they broke through and dragged him out in cuffs. Now they had both suspects. Demario, 21, Lawrence, just 17, two men, if you could call them that, who had turned a late-night robbery into a nightmare execution. But even with both in custody, one question still loomed. What exactly had happened in those lost hours between Eve working on her laptop and her lifeless body being discovered in the street? For weeks, investigators pushed both men for answers. Lawrence stayed silent, cold, defiant. Demario, on the other hand, cracked. Faced with the possibility of the death penalty, he made a deal, confessed to everything, and in return, prosecutors would take execution off the table. And so the horrifying truth came spilling out. That night, Lawrence called Demario, suggesting they drive around looking for an easy target. They weren't looking for Eve specifically. Just someone, anyone. They drove past a quiet student neighborhood. That's when they spotted her, sitting by the window studying alone. That's when the plan shifted. The men broke into the house, armed with guns, and forced Eve into her own car. From that moment on, she was their prisoner. They drove her to multiple ATMs, shoving her bank card at her, forcing her to withdraw as much cash as possible. Surveillance footage later showed her sitting terrified in the back seat, eyes wide as the men took her money. Throughout the ordeal, Eve begged for her life. She promised she wouldn't tell anyone. She pleaded for them to let her go. At one point, Demario said she even asked if they could pray together. But the men weren't interested in mercy. They were only interested in silencing her. After draining her account, they drove her to a secluded street. No cameras. No witnesses. Just darkness. And there, with 2 guns, they opened fire. Multiple shots tore through her body. Eve Carson, the beloved student body president, the woman who had given so much of herself to others, died alone, in the street, in the early hours of March 5, 2008. Her killers didn't even flinch. They dumped her body and drove off. The confession was damning. Demario painted himself and Lawrence as equal partners in the crime, both pulling the triggers. When the case went to trial, the details shook the courtroom to its core. Eve's parents sat silently, listening to how their daughter's final moments were filled with terror, and how, even then, she clung to compassion, asking her killers to pray. The brutality stunned even seasoned detectives. Prosecutors wasted no time. Demario had already pleaded guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. In 2010, he was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. When the verdict was handed down, Demario turned to Eve's family. He apologized. He said he deserved the punishment. But his words felt empty in the face of what he had done. Lawrence, however, refused to plead. He wanted to fight. He wanted to deny. His trial began in December 2011, and prosecutors came prepared. They had Demario's confession. They had the ATM footage. They had cell phone records placing both men near Eve's neighborhood at the exact time of the abduction. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Lawrence had no defense left. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But his story didn't end there. In 2013, the State Court of Appeals overturned his sentence, citing a U.S. Supreme Court, ruling that mandatory life without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. Lawrence was granted a new trial. This time he spoke directly to the court. He insisted he wasn't a monster. He said everyone makes mistakes. He asked for a second chance, but his words rang hollow. There was no genuine remorse, no acceptance of what he had taken away. The judge wasn't swayed. Once again, Lawrence Lovett was sentenced to life in prison. Still, there were whispers of something darker. Investigators believed Lawrence might have been involved in another eerily similar crime, the January 2008 murder of a 29-year-old student killed during a home invasion, followed by ATM withdrawals from the victim's account. The parallels were chilling. But with insufficient evidence, prosecutors couldn't prove it. The charges were dropped. For Eve's family, the pain didn't end in the courtroom. Her death sent shockwaves across the state and eventually led to change. In the months after the murder, North Carolina lawmakers passed stricter penalties for gang-related crimes, hoping to prevent more senseless violence like Eve's killing. On campus, Eve's memory lived on. A scholarship was created in her honor. A memorial garden was built, a quiet space where students could reflect on her legacy. Friends and classmates spoke about her warmth, her kindness, her laughter that could light up a room. In 2009, one of Eve's closest friends, a finalist on American Idol, shared how her death pushed him to chase his dreams. He said without her, he never would have had the courage to audition. Eve's life was short, but it was brilliant, and the impact she left behind continues to ripple through every person who knew her. Her story is a reminder of how quickly light can be stolen, and how even in the darkest times, one person's legacy can spark change, hope, and inspiration. And as for Demario Atwater and Lawrence Lovett, they'll spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Their choices robbed the world of Eve Carson. And though justice came slowly, it came with the weight of a community that refused to forget her. Eve's life was extraordinary. Her death was senseless, and her memory will never fade.